when you think about therapy, what usually comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's probably a pretty clear path. Find the symptom, use the right method, make the symptom go away, maybe in like 10 sessions.
Right. A predictable process aiming for a measurable result. That's the standard picture.
Exactly. But imagine this. A well-known British analyst, Darien Leader, is facing potential state regulation, and he comes out and says something. Well, pretty shocking. He says psychoanalysis actually doesn't aim at the removal of one's symptoms.
And he didn't stop there.
No. He added that in analysis, we don't know where we are going to go.
Which, in the world of empirical medicine, that's almost scandalous candor, isn't it?
It really is.
Because it just completely challenges that whole idea that therapy is judged by, getting rid of symptoms reliably. If you say that's not the main goal.
And the immediate question pops up. Okay, then what good is it? What's the point?
Precisely. And that question sets up what we're diving into today.
Yeah, this is a really deep, fundamental question that's been debated in psychoanalysis for, over a century now. Is its real value in sticking to specific techniques? Or is it about producing these often unexpected, sometimes surprising effects?
So we'll be looking at Freud, Lacan, some other major figures, and also a really fascinating personal clinical story.
Our mission really is to explore what might lie beyond just healing in the conventional sense, beyond just technique as a set of rules. What else is going on?
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where better to start than with Freud himself?
Right. Back in 1910, he was already worried about what he called wild psychoanalysis. Basically, people practicing without proper training, sometimes giving really questionable advice.
So to bring some order, he established the International Psychoanalytic Association, the IPA, set up certification.
Yeah.
You'd think he was all about laying down the law, standardizing the technique.
You would think. But even back then, he admitted something quite surprising. It hinted at, a much more flexible approach than you might expect.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
He talks about this case, a young divorcee with anxiety. A doctor, who Freud calls wild, gives her this advice that was just scandalous for the time, basically. Go back to your husband, get a lover, or, satisfy yourself.
Freud was critical, obviously. He called it a clumsy procedure, totally inappropriate.
But then, and this is the key part, he also said that even this clumsy, problematic intervention could still be useful. How?
He argued it might actually force the patient to confront the real cause of her trouble. It could introduce an idea she'd never considered, this link between her anxiety and her erotic life.
So a technically flawed, even ethically dubious intervention could still spark a crucial insight. An unexpected effect could emerge from bad technique. That's a pretty radical idea right there.
There really is. It suggests the learning, the real analytic work happens in the messy reality of practice, not just by following rules. And, later commentators like Adam Phillips noticed this too. Phillips said Freud was curiously unforthcoming about making rigid rules.
And there's that great story about Bernfeld from 1922. Bernfeld asks Freud, shouldn't new analysts have their own analysis first? A didactic analysis.
Yeah, to understand their own stuff before treating others. Makes sense, right?
You'd think. But Freud's response, nonsense. Go right ahead. You certainly will have difficulties. When you get into trouble, we will see what we can do about it.
Wow. Just jump in, figure it out as you go, and we'll deal with problems when they arise. That shows an incredibly flexible, almost learn-by-doing view of technique, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A far cry from a strict manual.
But, okay, that view didn't necessarily stick. Fast forward about 80 years. We hear from Jacob Arlo in a 1991 commencement speech.
Right. And Arlo paints this vivid picture. He imagines writing a rejection letter to Freud himself, applying to a modern psychoanalytic institute.
What's the reason for rejection?
Arlo says Freud's most famous cases, Dora, the Wolfman, Little Hans, Schreber's, they wouldn't pass muster today because Freud didn't follow proper technique by modern standards.
So complete reversal from Freud's own flexible stance.
Exactly. If you zoom out, Arlo's perspective shows this huge shift. For him, modern psychoanalytic thought and practice is its technique, the effects. They're just taken for granted. Meaning he basically assumes that if you just perform the technique correctly, the desired outcome will automatically follow. A bit like, say, a surgeon performing a properly performed coronary bypass. The technique guarantees the result, supposedly.
And Freud's original, messy, groundbreaking cases.
For Arlo, they become merely historical interest. Interesting history, maybe, but not models for current practice, because the technique wasn't right. The technique itself became the gold standard.
And this focus on technique wasn't unique to Arlo. You also had Patrick Mahoney writing a few years earlier in 1986, critiquing Freud's handling of the famous Ratman case.
Yeah, Monty really zeroed in on Freud's methods there. He argued Freud was too intrusive, too reassuring, too focused on digging up past causes, genetic interpretations, instead of focusing on what was happening right then in the room between him and the patient, the transference.
And Monty didn't mince words, did he? He called the treatment a failure.
He did. And his evidence was, well, rather simplistic. The rat man apparently married the wrong woman afterward.
So Monty's critique hinges entirely on Freud not using the correct techniques.
Pretty much. Monty judged Freud based on a very specific goal. He assumed analysis should have the dissolution of the transference neurosis. And he assumed this goal is best achieved through specific techniques, like making transferential interpretations, and the analyst being perfectly neutral.
So for Monty, the technique was the thing.
Absolutely. His whole argument relies on these assumptions about what the goal should be and which techniques must be used to get there. He doesn't really question why those specific technical outcomes are the be-all and end-all. It's very prescriptive, like, this is the right way, and Freud didn't do it.
It's really fascinating, then, to bring in Jacques Lacan, because even decades before Monty, Lacan was already voicing concerns about this trend, this professionalizing, this systematizing of psychoanalysis.
He was quite worried. Lacan felt that by creating a formal tradition and discipline, Freud might have unintentionally risked stifling the very core of analysis.
Which, for Lacan, was
its power to call into question, to shake things up, to challenge our settled view of reality and ourselves.
And how did he see this increasing focus on technique that Arlo and Monty later championed?
Lacan was deeply skeptical. He called it a valorization of technique, a kind of formalism that could become almost ritualistic. He compared it to obsessive neurosis, or even religious rites.
Strong words.
Very. He argued that, quote, as the objectives of analysis lose their importance, ritual forms of technique become more highly valued. Basically, if you lose sight of the why, what you're trying to achieve, you risk clinging to how the technique is an empty ceremony.
So given that critique, it's maybe surprising then that Lacan actually defended Freud in that same Ratman case Monty attacked.
It is surprising. Lacan acknowledged the criticisms about Freud being maybe too directive, this unseemly indoctrination, but he essentially dismissed those criticisms as irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Why?
Lacan suggested Freud understood the seductive scope of this game. He saw something deeper happening than just Freud applying or misapplying a technique.
So what was Lacan's core idea about technique then?
Well, for Lacan, formal technique was definitely secondary. Because analysis, in his view, isn't about uncovering some pre-existing truth or communicating known information. It's not like finding treasure on a map.
What is it then?
It's about maintaining the dialectic, that ongoing dynamic back and forth, the process of speaking, questioning, challenging, reinterpreting. That's what allows the analysand, the patient, to actually articulate their unconscious and work through their issues.
So the process itself is key.
Absolutely. Analysis needs to disturb the status quo ante, shake things up. Lacan even provocatively said there is only one resistance, the resistance of the analyst.
Meaning the analyst can be the roadblock.
Precisely. He meant the analyst's main job is to make sure the analysand keeps speaking, keeps that dialectic moving, even if it means deviating from the textbook. The analyst has to ensure the process doesn't just grind to a halt because of rigid adherence to rules.
Okay, so if we follow this line of thought, if analysis isn't mainly about symptom removal, and it's not strictly about following a technique manual, then what is the goal? What does a good analytic outcome look like?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the source material offers a really interesting concept, the analytic effect.
And how is that different from just feeling better, a therapeutic result?
It's fundamentally different. A therapeutic result often implies going back to how things were before the problem started, restoring a previous state of health. An analytic effect, though, is defined as something else entirely. It's about surprise.
Surprise.
Yes, it creates a new subjective awareness. A moment where you recognize something that felt alien or foreign before, but now you see it as part of yourself. It's a shift in your very understanding of who you are.
So it's not just relief, it's recognition, a kind of re-seeing yourself.
Exactly. A new recognition leading to a re-authorship of your own story, not just erasing a symptom.
So this dialectical procedure, this back and forth, means the end point isn't known in advance. It can't be.
Right. The optimal outcome isn't predetermined. And because of that, The techniques can't be fixed either. They have to be flexible, always in play, as the article puts it.
It sounds much more like exploration than repair.
That's a great way to put it. It's about discovering the unknown within the self, not just applying a known cure.
And this connects back to Freud's wild case, doesn't it?
Perfectly. That clumsy intervention was useful not because it offered a solution, but because it shocks the patient into thinking differently. It got the conversation, the discourse, moving in a new way. The analyst's role isn't to provide answers, but to create a space where the analyst's hand can surprise themselves.
And you mentioned Laplanche's idea.
Right. Laplanche talks about the Ptolemaic subject that's us in our everyday ego-centered view, where we think we're the center of our own universe versus the decentered subject. Analysis aims for that decentering, where you're surprised by bits of your own subjectivity, your own unconscious desires or thoughts that you hadn't recognized before. It can feel destabilizing, sure, but it's ultimately about embracing a fuller, more complex self.
Okay, theory is one thing, but how does this play out in practice? The source gives a really vivid example from the author's own clinical work.
Yeah, this is where it gets really concrete and honestly quite counterintuitive. He found that his ideally analyzable patients, the ones who seem perfect on paper, ticking all the boxes, often produced very few unpredictable moments. Their analyses felt kind of inert, predictable even.
They knew how to play the game, maybe.
Perhaps. They seemed to know exactly how to talk to their analyst. But then there was this other patient, someone initially considered unanalyzable.
Why unanalyzable?
Just very complex, lots of physical complaints, couldn't tolerate frustration well, on like over 20 medications, didn't fit the mold at all.
And what happened with her?
That's the fascinating part. This unanalyzable patient generated many more analytic effects, more moments of surprise and real subjective shifting.
How could that be?
Because, unlike the ideal patients, this woman had no clue how to be an analytic patient. She didn't come in with a prepackaged script. This forced the analyst, the author, to get creative. He had to actively create, never mind maintain, a dialectic.
So he couldn't just rely on standard techniques.
No, he had to adapt. He found himself doing things like managing her medications, changing session lengths, things outside the usual psychoanalytic playbook. And through this more flexible, responsive process, something shifted profoundly in her.
What was the shift?
She started moving from seeing herself as an it, a passive object that just suffered medical problems happening to her, to becoming an I, someone who could actually claim a role, a subjective position in her own life and experiences, a move from object to subject. It was a huge analytic effect.
Wow. That really turns the idea of the ideal patient on its head. It suggests maybe the difficult cases, the ones that force us out of routine, are where the most potent analytic effects can happen.
It certainly suggests that. And the author notes that it was only later, when he became a supervisor himself, that he really started questioning the rigid techniques he'd been taught. He saw trainees getting perplexed when the correct techniques didn't produce the expected results, especially compared to the surprising progress sometimes seen with less ideal patients.
That realization led him to propose a different way of thinking about analysis, didn't it? Not as therapeutics, but as
poetics, which sounds a bit abstract maybe, but the root of poetics is the Greek word poiesis, meaning making or creation.
So analysis as a creative act.
Exactly. Less like fixing something broken, therapeutics, and more like bringing something new into being, poetics.
Yeah.
He connects this to the poet Charles Olson and his idea of projective verse.
How does poetry connect here?
Olson argued against rigid poetic forms. He wanted the poem's form to arise directly from its content, for it to be a high-energy construct, where one perception must immediately and directly lead to a further perception. The emphasis is on the effect the poem has, its unique energy, its process of discovery, rather than just following a template or describing something already known.
So, like analysis, it's about the process of creation and the emergence of something new and unforeseen.
Precisely. It's about the impact, the surprise, the making of something unique each time, not just reproducing a standard model.
So wrapping this up, it feels like the thread connecting Freud's early, somewhat surprising flexibility through Lacan's sharp critiques and right up to this modern clinical example. It all points in one direction.
Yeah, it really does seem that the enduring core of psychoanalysis, viewed this way, lies in its effects, not in a specific, rigidly defined technique.
And those effects are characterized by?
They're characterized by surprise, by the emergence of something new for the person in analysis. And these effects arise from the analytic discourse itself, that unique unfolding dialogue, not from mechanically applying rules from a manual.
So insisting on one particular correct technique.
It actually risks limiting the potential for these truly profound, transformative effects. It underscores the idea that maybe, just maybe, the most effective approach requires, as some have put it, a new technique for every analysis, something uniquely tailored to that specific encounter.
That leaves us with a lot to think about. And maybe a final thought for you, our listeners. As you reflect on this whole idea of effect over technique, where else in your life might this apply? Think about areas of learning or creativity or even just personal growth.
Right. Where might holding too tightly to the way things are supposed to be done actually be closing off possibilities?
Yeah.
Where might allowing for more flexibility, more openness to the unexpected lead to a really profound discovery, something genuinely new?